She rode it to school one day. And everywhere that Mary went, she took her bicycle there. She rode it to school one day? No? Mary had a bicycle? Where? Mary had a bicycle. Well, we're going to continue on in the book of Esther. And we're going to be in chapter 4. So last week we saw Haman's dastardly plan that was birthed from his need for self-glory. So this chapter we're going to be looking at the response of Mordecai and Esther and how this creates a defining moment for them as individuals. We'll be starting at verse 1, chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews, of fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So I think Mordecai's response here makes sense. Every Jew in the kingdom has a reason to be worried. I can't help but wonder for Mordecai if it wasn't just maybe a little bit more personal. Because Mordecai actually had the relationship with Haman. He actually knew the guy, and he knew that Mordecai was the reason why Haman was mad at the Jews. It was Mordecai's actions that precipitated what Haman did. So I wonder if Mordecai would have felt this just a little bit more strongly than than the rest of the Jews. So in ancient Near East culture, the wearing of sackcloth is a method of mourning. So the idea is it's this rough clothing that's uncomfortable and unattractive. And it outwardly shows what you're inwardly feeling. I don't think it comes as a surprise looking at the Persian court that clothes for mourning would not have been allowed in the presence of the king. Because the Persian court is grand, it's impressive, it's puffed up, it's look at me and look at how wonderful everything is. Ignore that crying man in the corner. That's the attitude of the Persian court. The idea of having someone, in public display mourning, visually displeasing, would not have been something that the Persian court would have wanted to show or display. So there's rules saying, if you're dressed this way, you can only come so far. Any closer the king won't tolerate you dressed like that. So Mordecai gets to the very edge of what he can. Mordecai can't get any closer to the king or to the court with how he is dressed. One might say, well, if he really had this message that he needed to communicate, why would he have not chosen to dress differently? Why not change his dress so he could get those couple of extra steps, gain that extra little bit of access? I think Mordecai is trying to make a statement with his decision to mourn with his clothing. This is serious. This is a serious reason to mourn. And for Mordecai to make the decision to adjust his clothing in order to take those extra couple of steps to come in would deny the seriousness of what's going on. He has to be dressed in the morning attire. He needs to be wearing the sackcloth. He is not going to water down at all what he is feeling and the true evil nature of this command as it comes down. Now, some of you may have come across this realization by now. You've been looking at the timelines of, post-exilic times in the Old Testament and would have arrived at this conclusion. Because there's something not quite right with this picture and with the Jews living in Persia. King Xerxes ascended the throne after King Cyrus did. King Cyrus of Persia was the king who allowed the captives to go home. So what this means at this current time in history, there are Jews living in the Promised Land. The order was given, you are allowed to go back home, and people have responded and went back home. So the Jews living in Persia, Mordecai and Esther, these are Jews who have elected to remain in Persia underneath foreign occupation control. At a theological level, we don't really have a precedent for this. In the Jewish culture, the land is very important. Living in the land, dwelling in the land, is being God's people. It's so closely identified. So there's a level of complacency that exists for the Jews who were told, you have the ability to go back to your promised land, back to your inheritance. Who said, actually, maybe after 70 years away, maybe there's nothing back there for me. Maybe it's easier for me to stay where I am. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to stay put here. I'll take care of my shop that I've got here. My life is here now. It's not back there. I think it would be presumptuous to say that all of the Jews have turned their back on Yahweh. I think that statement would be too strong. But I do think there's a subtle undercurrent of a complacency for the Jews to not feel like they needed to go back to the land and live as the Jews had lived before. They don't need that same level of closeness. There is a distance between them and their heritage that they are okay with. And for some of them, it certainly would have translated into a distance between them and their faith and their decision to be one of God's people versus just being ethnically Jewish. So I think we can say many of the Jews living in Persia probably resembled Queen Esther a little bit more than we would think. They weren't living religiously distinguishable lives. A great many of them were not. A great many of them were probably content living lives that looked very Persian. It is one thing for us to say God will deliver his chosen people living in covenant with him. But maybe one of the tensions in this story is, how will God interact with his people when they are not living in covenant with him? I don't know if this would have been a question that Mordecai would have been thinking about as he's living chapter 4. I don't think he's thinking about these sorts of big questions. But these are the questions that us, as the reader, get to look at the story and wonder about. How will God intervene in this situation? Continuing with verse 4, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued at Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and to plead with him on behalf of her people. So notice, this exchange does not take place face to face. That is not a privilege that Esther has anymore. She is in the harem. She is not allowed out of the harem. She doesn't get to go down to town and have coffee with her relatives or anything on no shopping trips. If she has any business to do outside of the harem, she has to send servants to go and do it. Her isolation is so complete that she is completely unaware of what the rest of the kingdom knows. I find her gut reaction here to be just a little bit surprising. She hears Mordecai is wearing sackcloth and fussing. He's made enough clamor that word has even reached the harem that this has happened. Odds are there are people in the harem that probably knew that there was some sort of relationship. Some worked out, maybe she observed it from a window. But he has been loud and noisy enough that she has been able to observe. And her first response isn't what's wrong. Her first response is, let's get you cleaned up. Ooh, you're wearing sackcloth. Let's get you in regular clothes. Let's get you cleaned up. It's a relatively superficial response, isn't it? Because wouldn't your expectation to be, I see Brittany crying at one of the tables out there. I ask Brittany, what's wrong? I don't say, your mascara's running, get cleaned up, right? this too much, but I wonder if we're not just seeing maybe just a little bit of that Persian influence starting to creep into Esther's thinking. Maybe just a little bit, because she addresses the appearance first. And Mordecai's already made a point that he's not going to get any closer and change his garments, so he sends the clothes away. So then she asks him, all right, we'll send someone else and find out what's going on. Tells her what's going on. He ends his report of what's going on with a command to her to go before the king and fix it. Because Mordecai understands that Haman is the top dog. He's the chief official. All of those normal lanes of being able to access the king and talk to him about stuff, Haman's got a pretty tight control on those. There's no way in that way. Now Mordecai has come to the realization that Esther may very well have a unique opportunity here. As the queen, she might be able to bend the king's ear maybe in just a little bit different way. And so he commands Esther to do the opposite of what he had previously commanded to her. Before, he had told her to conceal who she was. Now he tells her to reveal who she was and to take a step out. And to do something relatively daring. Verse 9, and Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. And Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and to say, all of the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king in these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So Esther's response to go and see the king, it's a selfish response, isn't it? Basically, sorry, can't do this. No. Not going to do this, no. Didn't you look at Act 1 of the book? Back in chapter 1 it says, loud outspoken queen gets deposed. I'm not supposed to do what you just told me to do. The law is quite clear about that. The Persian court's not safe for me to go and speak like that. Everybody knows this. You got the script, right? And you know that the king, I haven't seen him in 30 days. He's not that interested in me right now. It's not like I've got him wound around my finger and I'll be able to make him do what I want him to do. I've been distanced from the king for this time. I don't have the opportunity that you think I got. It's just a string of but. So what does Esther think Mordecai's response is going to be? I understand. I get so I guess that's an awful lot to ask. I'm sorry. I wasn't aware that would put you in this awkward and uncomfortable position. Mordecai's response is a threat. If you think you're going to get away with that, you've got another thing coming. You're in the exact same boat that the rest of us are in. Maybe God will make sure that she pays for this from a divine source. Maybe he's gonna squeal on her. We don't know. We don't know exactly from what angle, if she were not too exposed, that she would be exposed, but Mordecai tells her, it might seem like you're safe with the place that God has put you in, but you're not. You're not any more secure there than you would be if you were here. The danger is real. Maybe this is one of the places where I feel like the absence of God in the story is one of the most noticeable. Because the book of Esther, famously does not mention God directly throughout the entire book. And when Mordecai makes the statement that deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, I just find that statement lacking. A lot of readers will say, well, the another place or the somewhere refers to God. That's what Mordecai means when he says that. But if that were truly what he meant, when he said that, he would be comparing Esther's ability to deliver with God's ability to deliver. Either Esther, you will go before and deliver, or God will have to go and do it. I don't think that's what he's getting at. I think when he says somewhere, he's just talking about another human. Another human will have to do this. Another human agent. It's tantamount to saying, well, I guess it'll all work out somehow. If Mordecai's thinking about God, he's certainly not saying it. And I wonder if the absence of God doesn't make the situation worse for Esther and Mordecai who are experiencing it. If the fear isn't a little bit greater. If the resistance, to the call to act, if it's just not a little bit more hardened than it would be otherwise. See, we're benefited by having God in our life when we're faced with adversity and trials. And so if we're holding God at an arm's length and we're in those moments, they're going to be harder. And I feel like this is happening here in this situation. Verse 15. Then Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all of the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. And thus we come to Esther's defining moment. We know her decision is made under duress. I don't know if we know the tone or the mood by which she spoke the phrase, if I die, I die. If this is a statement of great in her faith, or if this is a statement of resignation. We don't know. And I feel like we have cause to think either direction. But whether the decision was made joyfully or whether or not the decision was made under duress or not, Esther still has a defining moment before her here. She's been called to step out and to distinguish herself. And the result of this decision will define her life, one way or the other. She will either be defined by the fact that she stepped out and she answered the call of God, or she will be defined by the fact that she chose to stay, to not step out. Either decision is a major decision that alters the course of her life. It's not a small decision. This isn't a casual decision that sits in front of her. How many of you have heard the story of Cinderella? So if you look at the Grimm's fairy tale version of Cinderella, Grimm's fairy tales are always a little bit darker than the other versions that we have. But in Grimm's fairy tales, when Cinderella leaves the ball, the prince tries to catch her, and he spreads pitch across the stairs, and she gets stuck. She gets stuck on the stairs. And in that moment, Cinderella gets to make a decision. Does she stay to get caught? Does she choose to try to get away? Or option 3 that she takes, she leaves behind evidence to try to pursue on the prince's part. It's a what to do decision that she has. But a decision that regardless of what angle she takes, her life is going to change. She's not going to be Cinderella at the ball dancing with the prince after the outcome of this decision. She's either going to be married to the prince, she's either going to be living back at home as the sister taking care of the house and being mistreated by the stepmother. Those are the decisions that she has. When you are in a defining moment, your life will be changed one way or another. Some of us, when we get into these sorts of situations, our response is to not make any decisions. We get paralyzed, or we somehow think if I choose not to act, the situation will go away. We don't like change. We don't want our life to change. We'll just stop and not do anything. But that's a decision, isn't it? The decision not to move is a decision. And it's going to change your life. Now, some of us, and me here, maybe we like to deliberate. And you can sit and you can weigh, you can go back and forth and do this, or you could do that. You're the sort of person when you go to a restaurant and the waitress comes to take your order, and you ask to go last so you can have extra 20 seconds to make a decision. Because you don't have a decision ready. You need that extra little bit of time to just continue to weigh out what you want, or what are the pros and cons of soup over French fries? or maybe you go to KFC and you're staring at the menu and you're trying to decide what you want. It's all chicken, right? KFC has chicken. Shouldn't take too long to make a decision about what kind of chicken you're going to have. Yes, when we are in these decisions, we pray, we take counsel, we weigh our decisions, we do so in a timely manner. Because some decisions you just can't wait and deliberate forever and ever and ever. That in itself becomes a decision. And we will see in the next chapter, it's very good that Esther made her decision quickly. Because the order is going to come 11 months from down the line is when the execution of the Jews is scheduled. But Haman's already going to be working on building a gallows. And it's got one person's name on his mind. And he's not waiting 11 months to use it. We're going to see that next week. But for Esther, the fact that she made her decision timely, made a timely decision, is actually going to matter. Esther's decision, under duress or not, is final. It's stable. It's a real decision. It's not wavering. And her decision transforms her. And we see it right away in verse 17. Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Up until this point in the story, Mordecai has given all of the orders. All of the commands. Once Esther makes the decision to step out, she starts making more decisions. She starts having agency. Up until this point, Esther has been kind of like a tennis ball, batted wherever forces around her would move her. It wasn't her choice to enter the beauty contest. It wasn't her choice to become queen. It wasn't her choice to live the rest of her life in the harem. But this is her choice. We can see the decision that Esther made here changes her life from being an individual who is acted upon to an individual who is going to act on somebody else. Esther's defining moment made her decide who she was. Is she a Jew who is going to remain hidden? Or is she going to be a Jew who identifies with her people? Is she going to live out her life in the harem happily? Or is she going to make the decision to throw in her lot with the rest of God's people? When we consider the state of the Jewish nation living in Persia, individuals who made the decision to stay and to remain and to live otherwise Persian lives. We start getting a sense of maybe the spiritual flavor of what's going on in God's people and how Esther is breaking that. Esther is making the decision, I am going to live a distinguishable life here. People are going to know me for who I am, for what I am. She's choosing to become a visible member of God's people. This is healthier spiritual living on her part. And that's a decision that's always going to make. It's always going to be for the better for you. See, the greatest defining moment that any of us will ever have is when we decide whether or not we are going to be a distinguishable member of God's people. This is the greatest defining moment that we all have. And regardless of our decision, our life will be transformed by it. If we choose to be a member of God's chosen people, our life is never the same. If we choose to not be a member of God's people, our life is also going to be profoundly impacted. How do we respond when we are called by God? Do we say, sorry, couldn't possibly. No, don't see how that would happen. That's not safe. I'm not sure that that's wise. No. Not going to do that. I'll decide that next week. Or do we say,